Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I live in a small, quiet town nestled in a valley surrounded by dense woods. It's picturesque during the day, but at night, the place can feel different, isolated, eerie. One late November evening, I was driving home from a friend's house. It was a 40-minute drive on back roads that weave through the forest, the kind of road where your headlights are the only illumination for miles. There were no streetlights, no houses, just a seemingly endless stretch of trees and darkness. I was about halfway home when I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I saw it again, movement in my backseat. It wasn't the kind of movement that screams human, it was subtle, like someone shifting slightly in their seat. I glanced over my shoulder, but nothing was there, just an empty backseat. I laughed at myself, chalking it up to my paranoia from the creepy road. Still, I couldn't shake the unease, so I turned on the radio to fill the silence. It didn't help. Static filled the speakers, even though I had been listening to music just minutes earlier. No matter what station I tried, it was all static. As I fiddled with the radio, something caught my attention in the corner of my eye, a faint reflection in the rearview mirror. This time, it wasn't just movement, it was a shape, a figure. I froze, my heart racing. The figure was sitting directly behind me. I didn't dare turn around. Instead, I kept my eyes fixed on the mirror, hoping I was imagining things. But it was there, a dark, shadowy outline of a person. They weren't moving, just sitting silently, almost blending into the shadows. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a shadow cast by something outside. I decided not to stop or slow down. Instead, I pressed harder on the gas. The figure didn't move. It didn't react. It just was. As I neared the outskirts of the forest, the shape began to shift. Slowly, it leaned forward, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of its face, or lack thereof. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was nothing. Just an empty, dark void. At that moment, my headlights caught a deer darting across the road. I swerved, narrowly missing it, and came to a screeching halt on the side of the road. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. When I finally gathered the courage to look in the backseat, it was empty. No shadow, no figure, nothing. The radio was back to normal, playing a soft rock station. I sat there for a moment, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was tired, maybe it was a trick of my mind, but here's the part that still gives me chills. When I got home, I went to grab my bag from the backseat, and there it was, a single, muddy handprint smeared across the middle seat. For weeks after that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I tried to brush it off as a hallucination or my imagination running wild, but the handprint, it was real. I even took a photo of it, just in case I needed proof for myself later. I showed the picture to my friend, the one I'd been visiting that night, and they looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. "That's weird," they said, handing my phone back. "But, like, maybe he leaned on the seat earlier and just didn't notice." "Maybe," I said, though I knew I hadn't. The print wasn't mine. It was too big, the fingers longer and thinner than any human hand I'd ever seen. Still, I tried to move on. I avoided that forest road entirely, opting for the longer, well-lit highway route home from then on. Life returned to normal, for the most part, until about a month later. It was late December, just a few days before Christmas. I had been out running errands and stayed out later than I'd planned. By the time I headed home, it was dark, and the highway was deserted. The air was bitterly cold, and a light dusting of snow had started to fall, making the road slick. As I drove, I felt it again, that inexplicable sensation of being watched. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I resisted the urge to glance in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see anything. I couldn't see anything. Not again. But the feeling grew stronger, like a heavy weight pressing down on me. I finally gave in and looked. The back seat was empty, but the reflection in the mirror showed something else. Movement. This time outside the car. There was something running alongside my car. At first, I thought it was an animal, but as I strained to see through the snowflakes swirling in the headlights, I realized it wasn't. It was tall and humanoid, keeping pace with my car as if it weighed nothing. It wasn't running on the road. It was moving through the trees, leaping effortlessly from one to the next, its limbs unnaturally long and bent at odd angles. Every few seconds, it would stop and turn its head toward me, as if it were making sure I was still watching. Panic surged through me, and I floored the gas. My tires skidded on the icy road, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get home. I didn't look at the trees again, didn't check the mirror. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, white-knuckling the wheel until I finally saw the familiar lights of my neighborhood. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, catching my breath. The house was dark. My family family was out visiting relatives, but I didn't feel alone. The sensation of being watched lingered, like whatever had been with me on the road hadn't left. I stepped out of the car cautiously, glancing around the yard and the street. Everything was still. The only sound was the faint crunch of snow under my boots. But then I saw them. Footprints. They weren't mine. The prints were massive, elongated, and clawed, leading from the driver's side of my car to the edge of the woods. They stopped abruptly at the tree line, as if whatever had made them had simply vanished into thin air. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. In fact, I didn't sleep well for weeks. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind against the windows set me on edge. I kept the blinds closed and avoided the woods at all costs. I never saw it again, whatever it was. But every so often, when I'm driving at night and the road is quiet, I get that feeling, that weight, that sense that I'm not alone. Months passed, and life slowly crept back toward normal. The memory of that night still lingered like a stain, but I told myself it was over. Whatever had followed me had lost interest, or at least, that's what I hoped. But then, in late spring, something happened that made me question everything. I had started going on evening walks to clear my mind. The days were getting longer, and the warmer weather made it easier to push the memories of the winter behind me. My route took me through a small park on the edge of town, a peaceful place with walking trails that wound through open fields and sparse patches of trees. It felt safe, far removed from the oppressive woods of the backroads. One evening, just before dusk, I was walking along one of the trails when I noticed something out of place. A single, muddy footprint in the middle of the path. It was large, elongated, and clawed, just like the ones I'd seen outside my car months ago. I stopped cold, my stomach dropping. I glanced around, but the trail was empty. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the silence was pressing in on me. I wanted to turn back, but something compelled me to keep going. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it was just a coincidence, that my mind was playing tricks on me again. As I continued down the path, I saw more prints scattered in the dirt and weaving in and out of the trees. They seemed to circle the trail, as if whatever had made them had been watching people pass by, keeping its distance but never straying too far. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun was sinking lower, and the shadows of the trees stretched long and thin across the path. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, but deep down, I knew better. I was almost back to the park entrance when I heard it, a low, guttural sound, halfway between a growl and a hiss. It was close, too close. I spun around, but the trail behind me was empty. The sound came again, this time from the trees to my right. I caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of something dark slipping between the trunks. It was watching me. I could feel its eyes, though I couldn't see them. My legs moved before my brain did, and I broke into a full sprint, running toward the safety of the street lights and the distant hum of cars. The growl followed me, growing louder, more insistent, like it was right on my heels. When I finally reached the park entrance, I risked a glance back. The trail was empty, the trees still. But there, just at the edge of the shadows, I saw it, a shape hunched low to the ground, its limbs impossibly long, its face still that same featureless void. It didn't move. It didn't follow. It just watched as I stumbled backward onto the sidewalk, my chest heaving with terror. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the darkness, waiting for it to come closer. It never did. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window and didn't sleep at all that night. Since then, I've stopped walking in the evenings. I've avoided the park, the back roads, anywhere even remotely isolated, but the thing is, I still feel it sometimes. When I'm home alone at night, or when I'm driving and the road gets too quiet. That weight, that pressure, that inescapable sense of being watched. I was in college at the time, and the library was my go-to spot for studying. It was an old building, 3 stories high, with creaky floors and walls lined with dusty shelves of books that no one touched anymore. My favorite spot was a tucked-away corner on the 2nd floor where I could spread out my notes in peace. One night, I stayed later than usual to cram for an exam. By 10 p.m., most of the other students had cleared out. The place was dead silent, except for the occasional groan of the old pipes. I decided to take a break and go grab some water. The library had a small break area, but the vending machines were in the basement. I'd only been to the basement once or twice before. It was mostly used for storage and old records. The lights down there were dim, buzzing fluorescent tubes that flickered every so often. As I descended the stairs, I felt a chill that made me wrap my jacket tighter around myself. When I got to the bottom, I noticed the air was heavier, like the basement hadn't been aired out in years. The vending machines were tucked in a corner, past rows of forgotten books and ancient filing cabinets. I fed my dollar into the machine and hit the button for a water bottle. As the bottle clung plunked into the tray, I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't mine. I was standing still. They were slow, deliberate, and coming from somewhere deeper in the basement. My heart started to race, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a janitor or another student. Hello, I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. The footsteps stopped. I grabbed my water and turned to head back up the stairs, trying not to let my imagination get the better of me. But as I passed one of the rows of shelves, I saw her. A woman was standing there, partially hidden by the shadows. She was facing away from me, her long, matted hair hanging down her back. She was wearing a pale, tattered dress that looked like it belonged in a different century. Her arms hung limp at her sides. I froze. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. Was she lost? Homeless? Sick? Are you okay? I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't move. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving her. When I reached the stairs, I turned and bolted up them two at a time. I didn't stop until I was back on the second floor, where the lights seemed brighter and the air lighter. I considered calling campus security, but I didn't even know how to explain what I'd seen. There's a creepy woman in a dress standing in the basement didn't exactly sound urgent or believable. I decided to pack up my things and leave. As I headed for the exit, I passed by the front desk where the night librarian sat. I mentioned, as casually as I could, that I thought I saw someone in the basement. The librarian frowned. No one should be down there. The basement's off limits after 8 p.m. I nodded, thanked her, and hurried out into the cool night air. I never went back to the basement after that. A few months later, I'd overheard someone else talking about seeing a strange woman down there. They described her exactly as I'd seen her, tattered dress, long hair, silent. A few weeks after the encounter, I couldn't get the memory out of my head. The image of the woman standing there, motionless, seemed to follow me wherever I went. My logical mind kept trying to find explanations. Maybe it really was someone who'd snuck in, a squatter, maybe. But there was something about the way she stood so still, so unnervingly quiet, that didn't feel human. One day, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to do some digging. I figured if the basement held records, maybe it also held answers. I convinced myself it was nothing supernatural, just some quirky mystery tied to the history of the building. The library was built in the late 1800 seconds and had been part of the campus since the beginning. Surely something interesting would pop up. I started asking the staff about the library's history, but most of them didn't know much. The only person who seemed to have any real information was the head librarian, a woman named Mrs. Calder. She was older, in her late 60s, and had worked at the library for over 30 years. When I casually mentioned the basement and the woman I'd seen, her face went pale. She gave me a long, hard look before shaking her head. You shouldn't be going down there, she said quietly. It's not safe. Not safe. Why? I pressed. Mrs. Calder hesitated, then leaned in, lowering her voice. Years ago, back when I first started here, we used to let students use the basement for studying, but strange things kept happening. People reported seeing things, shadows, figures that weren't there when they turned around. Books would fall off shelves for no reason, and then she trailed off, her eyes darting around as if someone might overhear. And then what? There was an incident, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A girl went missing. She was last seen heading into the basement. They searched for days but never found her. Eventually, the police ruled it a runaway case, but no one believed it. Not after the stories. After that, the basement was closed to the public. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did they ever figure out what happened to her? Mrs. Calder shook her head. All I know is that she's not the only one who's gone missing around here. And if I were you, I'd stay far away from that basement. I wanted to believe she was just trying to scare me, but the look in her eyes was too genuine, too afraid. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words in my head. Missing girl, shadows, figures that weren't there. Against my better judgment, I decided I needed to see for myself. If nothing else, I could convince myself it was just my imagination. The next evening, I waited until the library was nearly empty. I brought a flashlight with me just in case. When I reached the basement door, I paused, my hand hovering over the handle. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and descended the stairs. The air felt heavier than before, almost suffocating. My flashlight beam cut through the dimness, revealing rows of dusty shelves and forgotten furniture. I walked slowly, listening for any sounds. At first, there was nothing but the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, but as I moved deeper into the basement, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the space. Hello, I called out, my voice trembling. No response, just the sound of the footsteps getting closer. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping across the shelves, and then I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the aisle, just as before, her back to me. Only this time, she was closer, much closer. Who are you? I managed to choke out. She moved, not her bodies, but her head. It turned ever so slowly until I could see the side of her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, those eyes, were black pits staring straight through me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran faster than than I ever had in my life, up the stairs and out of the library. I didn't stop until I was back in my dorm room, shaking and gasping for breath. That was the last time I set foot in that library. A part of me wanted to report what I'd seen, but who would believe me? Over the years, I've heard whispers from other students about strange things in the library, but no one ever stays long enough to find out the truth. A few years passed, and I tried to push the experience out of my mind. I graduated, moved to a different city, and started a new job. Life went on, but every now and then, I'd find myself thinking about that library and the woman in the basement. I told a few close friends about it, but they just laughed it off as a creepy college story or an overactive imagination. I almost convinced myself that they were right until something strange happened. One night, I was scrolling through social media when I came across a post from my old university. It was an announcement that the library was undergoing renovations, including the basement. They were planning to expand it into a modern study lounge. The post included photos of the construction work, and as I stared at them, a cold sense of dread washed over me. In one of the photos, taken deep in the basement, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the background. It was faint, almost like a trick of the light, but it looked eerily familiar. Too familiar. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The renovations were scheduled to be completed within a few months, and the thought of people gathering in that space, laughing, studying, oblivious to what might be lingering there, made my skin crawl. About a week later, I got an email from one of my old college friends, Erica. She worked at the university now, in the alumni office, and we stayed in touch sporadically. Her message was short, but it made my blood run cold. Hey, do you remember that creepy story you told me about the library basement? Weird stuff is happening during the renovation. Workers are refusing to go back down there. They say they're hearing voices and seeing things move on their own. Thought you'd find it interesting. Let me know if you want to catch up. I didn't reply. I didn't want to talk about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the basement and the strange things Erica mentioned. Against my better judgment, I started digging for more information. I checked forums, social media, and even obscure blogs about campus legends. What I found only made things worse. There were more stories that I'd never heard while I was a student. A janitor who quit after hearing a woman's voice singing softly in the basement late at night. A professor who claimed she felt someone grab her arm when no one else was around. Students who reported seeing shadows darting between the shelves. And the most unsettling one, an old campus newspaper article from the 1970s about a seance held in the library by a group of students. The article didn't say much, but it mentioned that something went wrong. Very wrong. The deeper I dug, the more convinced I became that the library wasn't just haunted, it was dangerous. I wanted to warn Erica, but what could I say? That she should stay away from the basement because I had a bad feeling. She'd laugh me off. A few weeks later, I got another email from her. This time, the subject line read, "They found something." Her message was short again, but this time, it included an attachment, a blurry photo of what looked like an old wooden door, heavily padlocked, that the construction workers had uncovered behind one of the basement walls. According to Erica, no one knew it was there. The university was calling in a historical consultant to figure out what it was, but rumors were already flying around campus. Something told me that door was the source of everything. The shadows, the voices, the woman. I wanted to forget about it, to leave it all in the past, but I couldn't. I needed to know what was behind it. A week later, Erica called me. She sounded shaken. They opened the door, she said, her voice trembling. There was a room. It was small, barely big enough to stand in, but there were markings all over the walls, symbols, words in a language no one could read. And on the floor, they found, she paused, taking a shaky breath. They found bones, human bones. I didn't say anything. What could I say? They think it's connected to that missing girl, Erica continued, but I don't think it's all. There's something else, something wrong. The workers refuse to go near it now. They're saying they're seeing her, the woman you described. She's there, just standing outside the door, watching. That was the last time I spoke to Erica. The university shut down the renovations shortly after, citing structural concerns, but I know that wasn't the real reason. Whatever they uncovered in that basement, it wasn't meant to be disturbed. I've moved on with my life as best I can, but sometimes, late at night, I still think about her. The woman in the basement. I don't know who or what she was, but I know one thing for sure, some doors should never be opened. I was living in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building at the time. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was quiet, and I liked that. The neighborhood was mostly families and retirees, and there wasn't much foot traffic aside from people walking their dogs or kids riding bikes. One night, I was watching TV around 10 p.m. when I heard a strange sound outside. It was faint, almost like a baby crying. At first, I thought it was just my neighbor's TV, but then it got louder and more distinct, like a cat meowing, but drawn out and I went to the window and looked down at the street. There wasn't anyone there, just the glow of the street lights and empty parked cars. The sound stopped, and I figured the cat had moved on. About an hour later, I was brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed, when I heard it again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from right outside my door. I froze, toothpaste foam still in my mouth, and just listened. It wasn't a normal meow. It was low, guttural, and almost human-like. I live on the 3rd floor. There's no way a cat could have climbed up there, but curiosity got the better of me. I spat out the toothpaste, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. No cat, no person, nothing. But as soon as I stepped out, I heard it again, louder this time, like it was just around the corner. I don't know what possessed me to follow it, but I did. I walked down the hall, flashlight in hand, toward the sound. When I turned the corner, the meowing stopped abruptly, and that's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, there was a cat, or at least, I thought it was a cat. It was pitch black, with glowing yellow eyes that didn't reflect the light from my flashlight the way they should have. It just sat there, staring at me, perfectly still. "Hey, kitty," I said softly, trying to sound calm. It didn't move. Its eyes didn't blink. I took a step closer, and the thing stood up. Not like a cat, like a person. Its front legs, or arms, I guess, stretched unnaturally long, and its back arched in a way that made my stomach turn. It didn't walk or run. It just glided toward me. I panicked and bolted back to my apartment, slamming the door shut and locking it. My heart was racing as I backed away, flashlight shaking in my hand. Then I heard it again, the meow, but this time, it was coming from inside my apartment. I didn't even think. I grabbed my phone and ran out of there, not stopping until I was in my car. I drove to a friend's place and stayed the night there, making up some excuse about my plumbing flooding or something. I never told her the real reason. The next day, I went back to my apartment, dreading what I might find, but everything was normal. No sign of the cat, or whatever it was. I even asked my neighbors if they'd heard anything weird the night before. They all said no. I moved out a few months later. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was some sort of weird dream. Maybe I was overtired, or maybe the sound I heard was a stray cat that somehow got in. But the way it moved, I couldn't shake that. It wasn't normal. Even after I moved to a new apartment in a completely different neighborhood, I found myself jumping at little noises, scratches on the wall, wind rattling the windows, things like that. I'd always double check my locks and sleep with the light on, just in case. A few months after I moved, I started to feel normal again. No weird noises, no creepy feelings, no. Think in the hallway, life went on. I stopped telling people about it because, honestly, their skepticism made me doubt myself. But then, about 6 months ago, something happened that made it all come rushing back. I was walking home late after dinner with a friend. It was about 11 p.m. and the streets were quiet. The only sound was the faint buzz of streetlights and the occasional hum of a passing car. As I turned the corner onto my street, I heard it again, the meow. That same, drawn-out, guttural sound. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe a normal cat had me paranoid. But the closer I got to my building, the louder it got. When I reached my front steps, it stopped. I froze, staring at my door, waiting for something. I don't know what. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just a stray, and forced myself to go inside. My new apartment was on the 2nd floor of a small building. No hallways, just a set of stairs leading to my door. As I climbed the stairs, I felt that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I looked over my shoulder, and there it was. The black cat was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at me. Its eyes still didn't reflect light. They just glowed faintly, like embers. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I tried to tell myself to run, to get inside and lock the door, but I couldn't move. I was frozen. Then it did that horrible thing again. It stood up, its limbs stretching and bending in ways they shouldn't. It tilted its head, almost like it was amused, and took one gliding step toward me. That broke the spell. I ran up the stairs, slammed the door behind me, and locked it. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I just hid in the corner of my living room, clutching my phone, too scared to call anyone because I didn't want to make a sound. I sat there for hours, straining to hear anything outside, but it was silent. No footsteps, no scratching, nothing. When the sun finally came up, I mustered the courage to peek out the window. There was no sign of the thing, just the quiet, empty street. I called out of work that day and spent it researching, trying to figure out what it could have been. I looked up stories about shadow people, cryptids, and even folklore about black cats, but nothing quite matched what I saw. Since that night, I've been carrying salt in my pocket and a small iron charm on my keychain, just in case. I don't know if they'll do anything, but they make me feel a little safer. I haven't seen it again, but I know it's not gone. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear faint scratching at my window or what sounds like a meow in the distance. I've tried to move on with my life, but it feels like whatever this thing is, it's not letting me. For months after that last encounter, I lived on edge. I kept my curtains drawn at all times, checked my locks multiple times before before bed and avoided walking outside at night. My friends started noticing my paranoia, and I ended up telling one of them about it, just the broad strokes, leaving out the weirder details. She laughed it off, saying I probably watched too many horror movies, but she did suggest getting a security camera for peace of mind. I liked the idea, so I bought one of those small indoor cameras that connect to your phone. I set it up at my living room, facing the window. If anything came near my apartment again, I wanted proof, or at least some warning. For weeks, nothing happened. I started to relax a little, convincing myself that whatever I'd seen was gone for good. But one night, I woke up to a notification on my phone, motion detected. My heart started pounding as I grabbed my phone and opened the app. At first, the screen was just a grainy view of my dark living room. I was about to dismiss it as a glitch when I noticed something near the window. A shadow. It was subtle, just barely visible against the curtain, but it was there, and it was moving. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. The shadow shifted slowly, like it was pacing back and forth. Then it stopped, and for a second, everything was still. And then, the meow, clear as day, coming through the camera's audio. That horrible, low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. The shadow on the screen seemed to swell, growing larger until it filled the entire frame. Then the feed cut out. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Call the police. What would I even say? That a shadow cat thing was stalking me. Instead, I grabbed the salt I'd been keeping, poured a line across my door and windowsills, and sat on the floor clutching my phone. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun came up, I checked the camera again. The feed was back to normal, but there was no recording of what I'd seen. Just a gap in the footage, like it had never happened. I tried to convince myself to stay, to not let this thing ruin my life. But the truth is, I was too scared. Within a week, I broke my lease, packed up, and moved in with a cousin across the state. I didn't tell her why, just that I needed a fresh start. For a while, things were quiet. I started to feel normal again, like maybe I left it behind. But last night, it happened again. I was in my cousin's backyard, letting her dog out before bed, when I heard it. That same horrible meow, echoing from the woods behind her house. The dog froze, its ears perked up, and let out a low growl. I didn't wait to see if anything appeared. I grabbed the dog and ran inside, locking the door behind me. Now, I don't know what to do. It's followed me across the state. I don't think it's going to stop. I don't think it can stop. And the worst part is, I don't know what it wants. If anyone has any idea what this could be or how to make it go away, please let me know. I'm scared it's only a matter of time before it gets inside again. And next time, I might not be so lucky. A few years ago, I worked part-time at a small boutique in our local mall. It wasn't one of those huge malls with endless corridors. It was more modest, with just a few anchor stores and a food court. My shifts often ran late, as we stayed open until 9 p.m., but I usually felt safe since the mall security was pretty diligent. One evening, I was closing the store by myself. My coworker had left earlier because she wasn't feeling well, so it was just me. As I counted the till and straightened up the displays, I noticed a man lingering just outside the glass storefront. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just standing there, staring through the glass. At first, I thought he might just be waiting for someone, but as I continued my closing routine, I realized he wasn't moving. He was watching me. His face was blank, expressionless in a way that sent a chill down my spine. Trying to brush it off, I locked the door and flipped off the main lights, hoping that would signal him to move on. It didn't. Instead, as I grabbed my bag and headed toward the employee exit, I saw him fall into step behind me. The mall was practically empty at this point. Most of the stores had already closed, and the few remaining employees were scattered across the sprawling layout. I quickened my pace, clutching my bag tightly. The man kept following me, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. I glanced over my shoulder, and his eyes locked onto mine. There was something off about him. His movements were jerky, almost puppet-like, and he didn't seem to blink. I ducked into a side hallway that led to the staff restrooms, hoping to lose him. After waiting a few moments, I peeked out. The hallway seemed empty, and I let out a shaky breath. I decided to head straight to the security office, just to be safe. As I turned the corner, I almost screamed. He was there, standing a few feet away, blocking my path. I hadn't heard his footsteps. He was just there. "You forgot something," he said, his voice low and gravelly. He held out his hand, but it was empty. "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, backing away. His expression twisted into a grin, and he took a step closer. "You'll remember soon enough." Before I could respond, another set of footsteps approached. A mall security guard appeared at the end of the hallway, and the man immediately backed off, slinking into the shadows cameras without another word. I ran to the guard, explaining what had happened, but by the time we returned to the hallway, the man was gone. Security reviewed the footage from the cameras, but here's the creepy part, they couldn't find him. The cameras outside my store, in the hallways, even near the staff restrooms. There was no trace of him. For a while after that night, I avoided the mall altogether. I took some time off work, and when I returned, I only worked day shifts. My manager was sympathetic when I explained what had happened, but I could tell she thought I was overreacting. Things seemed to go back to normal. I told myself it was just a weird guy playing a creepy prank or trying to intimidate me. Maybe the cameras just glitched, or maybe security didn't look hard enough. I wanted to believe that. For a while, I almost did. Then, about a month later, I was walking to my car after a Saturday afternoon shift. The parking lot was crowded, filled with shoppers heading home for the evening. As I approached my car, I noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. It was a small, folded piece of paper. My heart sank as I unfolded it. Written in messy, jagged handwriting was a single sentence. "I told you, remember?" I froze, clutching the note in my hands, scanning the parking lot. Dozens of people were coming and going, but no one stood out. No one was watching me, or at least, not that I could tell. I called mall security and showed them the note. They checked the parking lot cameras this time, and sure enough, they caught someone on video. The footage showed a man approaching my car, slipping the note under the wiper, and walking off. The angle wasn't great, but I recognized him immediately. It was him. The way he moved on the footage was the same, that jerky, unsettling gait, like he wasn't quite in control of his limbs. But then came the worst part. The moment when he turned toward the camera, his face was pale, his eyes wide, unblinking, and even though the footage was silent, you could almost feel the weight of his grin. Security said they'd keep an eye out, but they couldn't do much without knowing who he was or what he wanted. I filed a police report, but they didn't have much to go on, either. No name, no clear motive, just a creepy guy who somehow knew where I worked and what car I drove. I stopped working at the boutique not long after that. I couldn't handle the anxiety of walking through the mall alone anymore. For months, I avoided public places altogether. I kept expecting him to show up again, outside my house, at the grocery store, anywhere. Thankfully, he never did. At least, not that I know of. I thought I was finally moving past it, until a few weeks ago. I had mostly put the experience behind me. Life had gotten back to normal. Work, friends, the occasional outing. I had convinced myself that it was over, that maybe the man had just been some unhinged stranger who moved on to someone else or gave up on whatever his creepy intentions were. But then I started noticing something. It began small. One day, I noticed my kitchen window was slightly open when I was sure I had closed it. Another time, I came home to find the throw blanket on my couch had been moved, not in a way that suggested it had just slid off, but as if someone had sat there. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I hadn't closed the window all the way, or maybe I'd just forgotten I'd moved the blanket. But the feeling of being watched crept back in. That same prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was just out of sight, staring. And then, 2 nights ago, it happened again. I was watching TV in my living room, curled up with a cup of tea, when I heard a faint tapping sound. It was coming from the sliding glass door that led to my small backyard. I froze, staring at the door. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping was deliberate, like someone was trying to get my attention. I wanted to believe it was a tree branch or maybe an animal, but deep down, I knew better. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed my phone and crept toward the door, pulling the curtain aside just a fraction. My heart dropped. There he was. He was standing just outside the glass, his face inches from the door. That same pale skin, those unblinking eyes, that sickening grin. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me. I stumbled back, my hand shaking as I dialed 911. "There's a man at my back door," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. The operator assured me police were on their way. I glanced back at the door. He was still there, but now he was tilting his head, like he was studying me. Slowly, he raised his hand and pointed at me, then dragged his finger across his throat in a slow, deliberate motion. I ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The police arrived quickly, but by the time they searched the backyard, he was gone. The officers told me there were no footprints in the yard, which didn't make sense. It had rained earlier that evening, and the ground was still soft. They tried to reassure me, but I could tell they were just as unnerved as I was. "Val, I'm staying with a friend. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore. I don't know how he found me again, or why he's doing this. All I know is that he's not done. I keep thinking about what he said the first night we met. You forgot something, you'll remember soon enough." I used to work as a night shift janitor at an office building. It was one of those modern, glass and steel structures downtown that stayed eerily quiet after business hours. I was typically the only one in the building after 8 p.m., aside from the occasional late working executive or security guard making rounds. The pay was decent, and I didn't mind the solitude until one night made me question everything. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was finishing up on the 12th floor. This particular floor was mostly empty, save for a few offices on one end and a large conference room with glass walls on the other. As I was vacuuming near the elevators, I thought I saw movement in the reflection of the glass doors leading to the conference room. At first, I assumed it was just my own reflection or maybe a trick of the light, but when I looked closer, I saw a figure standing just inside the conference room, staring directly at me. They were tall, dressed in dark clothing, and completely still. The glass distorted their features, so I couldn't make out a face. I froze. The building was supposed to be locked after 8 p.m., and security had already done their rounds. I turned off the vacuum, thinking maybe it was a late working employee who I hadn't noticed earlier. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing down the silent corridor. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there. My stomach dropped. I wasn't sure what to do, so I decided to head toward the conference room to get a better look. As I approached, the figure moved, not toward me, but sideways, out of view, deeper into the room. My heart was pounding, but I kept walking, convincing myself it had to be a harmless explanation. When I reached the doors, I cautiously opened one and peeked inside. The room was empty. There were no other exits except the one I'd just come through. The only things in the room were a long table, a few chairs, and a projector mounted on the ceiling. I even checked under the table and behind the chairs, but there was no one there. I was completely freaked out, but I tried to shake it off as my imagination. I left the conference room, locked the door, and went back to cleaning. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About an hour later, I was on the 15th floor, cleaning the kitchenette. I glanced up at the window and nearly screamed. That same figure was standing outside the glass, on the ledge, 15 stories above the ground. Their face was pressed against the window, but it wasn't a face, it was just a blank, featureless surface where a face should be. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair in the process. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear the glass move, nothing. Just silence. That was the last straw. I grabbed my things and left the building, leaving the rest of my shift unfinished. I told my boss I had a family emergency and couldn't work nights anymore. They didn't press me for details, and I didn't offer any. For months after I left the job, I tried to rationalize what had happened. I told myself it was a trick of the light or maybe stress getting to me, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw that night was real. The nightmares started shortly after I moved. In them, I was back in that building, walking the silent halls. The figure was always there, just out of reach, watching me through the glass. Sometimes, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'd see it standing in my room. Thankfully, I never did. At least, not at first. One night, about 3 months after I left the job, I was sitting on my couch, binge watching a TV show. It was past midnight, and my apartment was dark except for the glow of the screen. I lived on the 3rd floor, and my windows faced a quiet alley. It was a peaceful place, and I'd never felt unsafe there, until I saw it again. At first, I thought it was a shadow. Something outside must have cast it, maybe a passing car or a stray cat on the fire escape. But then I realized the figure wasn't moving. It was standing perfectly still, just outside the window, staring in at me. My blood ran cold. It was the same as before, tall, featureless, and utterly silent. It didn't press its face to the glass this time, but I could feel its gaze, even without eyes. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, but as soon as I turned my head to grab it, the figure was gone. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. I told myself it was just leftover fear from that night at the office building. My mind played tricks on me. But as the days went on, strange things started happening. I'd wake up to find my apartment door unlocked, even though I was sure I bolted it before bed. My keys would go missing, only to reappear in strange places, once in the freezer, another time inside my shoe. Lights I'd turned off would be on when I came home, and the air in my apartment always felt heavy, like I wasn't alone. The final straw came about a week later. I'd installed blackout curtains in my bedroom to help me sleep, and they did a good job of keeping the room pitch dark. One night, I woke up suddenly, my heart racing for no apparent reason. As I blinked into the darkness, I saw it. The figure was standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just lay there, paralyzed, as it stood there, unmoving. It didn't make a sound, didn't come closer, it just watched. Finally, I managed to reach for the lamp on my bedside table. As soon as the light flooded the room, the figure was gone. I packed a bag that night and left. I didn't care where I went, I just couldn't stay there anymore. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch for a few days while I figured out what to do. Eventually, I moved again, this time to a new city, far away from everything. Even after moving and putting distance between myself and those encounters, the fear fear lingered. The figure was gone, but its presence felt burned into my mind like a shadow I couldn't escape. Therapy helped to some extent. I told my therapist the sanitized version of events, just enough to sound like stress-induced paranoia without coming across as entirely unhinged. She chalked it up to trauma and recommended grounding techniques to ease my anxiety. For a while, life felt endless normally. I got a new job, made new friends, and began to settle into my routine. But the figure never really left my thoughts. It became a quiet undercurrent in my life, lurking in my subconscious. I'd double check logs, avoid looking too long into windows at night, and always keep a light on when I slept. It was around this time that the dreams began again. Only this time, they weren't confined to the old office building. In these dreams, I'd be in my new apartment or walking the streets of my new neighborhood, and the figure would be there, standing just far enough away to make me question if it was real. Sometimes it would move closer, but never quickly. It was always slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat after one of these dreams. It was 3:33 a.m. exactly. My phone buzzed on my nightstand, startling me. It was a notification, a missed call from an unknown number. I stared at the screen, trying to shake the grogginess, and then it buzzed again. Another call. The number was blocked this time, and I didn't answer. Instead, I turned off my phone and lay there, staring at the ceiling, heart racing. After what felt like an eternity, I must have drifted back to sleep because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, I felt relief until I saw my phone lying on the nightstand, screen cracked as though it had been slammed onto the floor. I didn't remember touching it after turning it off. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening again. Footsteps in the hall when no one was there. Objects moved from where I left them. Once, I came home to find the mirror in my bathroom shattered, with the words "We see you" scrawled in the condensation on the glass. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I reached out to the only person I thought might understand, a former security guard from the office building. We'd exchanged numbers once in passing, and I never expected him to pick up, but he did. When I explained what I'd been experiencing, there was a long pause on the other end. Finally, he said, "You're not the first." He told me that over the years, several people have reported strange encounters in that building. Shadows moving where they shouldn't, whispers in empty rooms, even sightings of a tall, faceless figure. Some claimed to follow them after they left, though no one had ever been able to explain why. "Do you know what it is?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever it is, it's attached to you now." I didn't know what to say. He told me to try cleansing rituals, prayers, anything that might break the connection. I tried everything he suggested, burning sage, leaving bowls of salt in every room, even consulting with a spiritual medium. For a while, it seemed to work. The noises stopped, the dreams faded, and I almost convinced myself it was over. Until last night, I was walking home from work, taking a shortcut through a quiet park. The air was cool, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot. I glanced around, enjoying the stillness, until I noticed something. A figure standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me. I froze. It was the same as before, tall, featureless, and utterly still. My breath hitched, and I fought the urge to run, knowing instinctively it would follow. Instead, I turned slowly and walked away, keeping my eyes forward. I could feel its presence behind me, closing the distance with every step. When I reached the street, I finally dared to look back. The park was empty. I don't know what it wants, or why it won't leave me alone. All I know is that it's patient, and it's always there, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. And one day, I'm afraid it won't just be watching anymore. I live in a small town with a nature preserve that has a popular trail loop. It's the kind of place where people go jogging, walk their dogs, or just clear their heads. It's usually pretty busy during the day, but I decided to go later in the evening because I wanted some quiet. The trail is a 2-mile loop that winds through the woods, and at a certain point, you're completely surrounded by trees with no sight at the parking lot or the main road. That's where this encounter happened. I'd been walking for about 15 minutes when I noticed it. At first, I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me, but then I realized it had gotten completely silent. No birds, no wind rustling the leaves, just nothing. That's weird in itself, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence. Then, I started to feel like I wasn't alone. You know that sensation when you're sure someone is watching you. It crept up on me, and no matter how much I told myself I was being paranoid, I couldn't shake it. I glanced behind me. Nothing, just the empty trail stretching back into the trees. I picked up my pace, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. I told myself I was just imagining things. Maybe I'd read too many creepy stories online, but then I heard it, a soft, deliberate crunch of leaves off to my left, deeper in the woods. I froze and scanned the trees. At first, I didn't see anything, but then a movement caught my eye. Someone, tall, wearing dark clothes, was standing about 20 feet into the trees, just watching me. They didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, partially obscured by the shadows. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. They didn't even flinch. I started walking again, faster this time, but I could hear the sound of leaves crunching, matching my pace. Whoever they were following me but staying off the trail. At this point, I was panicking. I didn't want to outright run and make it obvious that I was scared, but I was speed walking as fast as I could without breaking into a jog. Every so often, I'd hear another crunch, always keeping pace with me. When I finally saw the break in the trees where the parking lot was, I felt a rush of relief until I glanced back one last time. The figure was standing at the edge of the trail now, completely visible. They were tall, wearing what looked like a hoodie with the hood up. I couldn't see their face. They just stood there, not moving, watching me. I ran the rest of the way to my car, fumbling with my keys and practically throwing myself inside. As I locked the doors, I glanced back at the trail. The figure was gone. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down before finally driving home. I never reported it because, honestly, what would I have said? That someone stood in the woods and creeped me out. I haven't been back to that trail since. The experience left me shaken for weeks, but I tried to push it out of my mind. Maybe it was just some random person messing around, I told myself. It wasn't until a couple of months later that I realized how wrong I was. I was scrolling through my local community Facebook group when a post caught my eye. A woman was warning others about a strange man she had seen while jogging on the same trail. Her description was eerily similar to what I'd seen: tall, dark hoodie, staying just off the path and watching without saying a word. She said she reported it to the park rangers, but they didn't find anyone when they searched the area. That post brought everything back, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a one-off encounter. I started checking the group more often, and over the next several months, similar stories started popping up. People described the same figure, always keeping their distance, always silent, and always disappearing before anyone could confront them. One post really got under my skin. A man shared that he'd been hiking the trail just before sunset when he felt someone watching him. He turned around and saw the figure just like I had, but when he shouted at them, the person started moving, running deeper into the woods. The man said he followed for a short distance but stopped when he realized how far they were going into the trees. "It felt like they were trying to lure me out there," he wrote. That sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just creepy behavior anymore, it felt calculated. The breaking point for me came when a friend of mine, Sarah, told me her own story. She'd heard about my experience but brushed it off, thinking it was exaggerated. She loved the trail and refused to stop going. One evening, she decided to do the loop solo, just like I had. About halfway through, she said she felt the same eerie silence I described, like the entire forest was holding its breath. Then she saw the figure not just standing off the path, but crouched low in the bushes as if trying to stay hidden. She didn't stick around to investigate. She turned and ran, not stopping until she reached the parking lot. The worst part, when she got to her car, there was a piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. It just said, "See you soon." That was it for both of us. I convinced her to report it, and the park officials promised to look into it, but nothing ever came of it. To this day, people in our town still post about strange encounters on that trail. Some have started referring to the figure as the Trail Watcher, like some kind of local legend. After Sarah's experience, the unease in our small town grew. The park trail became less popular, especially in the evenings. But the sightings didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent. The local authorities dismissed it as a prank or someone trying to scare people off, but those of us who'd encountered the figure knew better. There was something deeply unsettling about the way they operated, always just out of reach, always silent, always vanishing the moment you tried to confront them. It felt too deliberate to be a prank. Then came the incident that changed everything. A young man named Eric, who worked as a delivery driver in town, decided to take his dog for a walk on the trail late one afternoon. He wasn't the type to scare easily and laughed off the stories about the Trail Watcher. According to his girlfriend, he even joked about wanting to see what all the fuss was about. Eric didn't come home that night. His girlfriend reported him missing the next morning when she woke up and realized he hadn't returned. His car was still parked at the trailhead, but there was no sign of him or his dog. Search parties combed the woods for days. They found his dog first, tied to a tree about a mile off the trail. The poor thing was terrified but unharmed. They found Eric 2 days later. He was alive but barely conscious, lying in a shallow ditch deep in the woods. His clothes were torn, and he was covered in scratches and bruises. The search team said it looked like he'd been running blindly through the underbrush, but what was most disturbing was his state of mind. Eric wouldn't, or couldn't, say what had happened to him. He just kept muttering the same thing over and over: "It's not a man. It's not a man." He was taken to the hospital, but after a few days, his family transferred him to a mental health facility. He still hasn't spoken about what he saw, and the few times people have tried to bring it up, he gets agitated and refuses to talk. The authorities doubled down on their stance that there was nothing to fear, claiming Eric must have had some kind of psychotic break or been attacked by a wild animal. But no one bought that explanation, not after everything that had already happened. The trail is mostly abandoned now. A few brave, or foolish, people still go, usually during the busiest parts of the day. But there are no guarantees. The trail watcher doesn't have a pattern. They don't care if it's daylight or dark, busy or empty. If they decide to appear, they will. I've heard whispers about people organizing groups to go out and find whatever or whoever is behind the sightings. But honestly, I think it's a bad idea. Whatever this thing is, it isn't something you want to mess with. Eric's encounter proved that much. I've moved on from that town, but every once in a while, I check the community Facebook group to see if there are any updates. The stories keep coming, and they're getting stranger. Some people claim to hear whispers in the woods, like voices calling their names. Others report seeing multiple figures now, not just one. I don't know what's happening on that trail, and I don't want to know. All I can say is this: if you're ever in a small town with a quiet nature preserve and a 2-mile loop trail, maybe think twice before you go for a walk. And if you hear the forest go silent, or you feel eyes on you where there shouldn't be any, leave. Don't wait to see what or who is out there. There's an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of my town, a massive, crumbly relic that's been shut down for decades. Growing up, everyone heard the rumors it was haunted, used for cult rituals, or home to squatters. But the truth, no one really knew. It was a place you avoided unless you were a thrill-seeking teenager, or in my case, someone who took a dare a little too seriously. A few friends and I were hanging out one night, trading stories about local legends. Someone brought up the hospital and dared me to walk through it alone. Feeling bold, I accepted. They gave me a flashlight and waited outside while I stepped through the broken front doors. The air inside was stale and damp. Graffiti covered the walls, and debris was scattered everywhere. My flashlight flickered, illuminating peeling paint and shattered windows. It was eerily quiet, except for the occasional creak of the building settling. I told myself it was fine. Nothing supernatural was going to happen. It was just an old building. But as I moved deeper, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew colder, and I swear I heard faint whispers. I stopped and listened, but the sound faded, leaving only the pounding of my heart. Then I saw it. At the end of the hallway was a doorway leading into what must have been an old operating room. The faint glow of moonlight streamed in through a broken window, illuminating the room just enough to see shapes inside. My curiosity got the better of me, and I walked closer. As I stepped into the room, the first thing I noticed was the gurney in the center, rusted and covered in grime. But what froze me in place was the figure standing in the far corner. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. There was someone there, hunched over, facing the wall. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move. It just stayed there, motionless. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I took a step closer. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural humming sound, almost like a chant. It wasn't coming from the figure, but seemed to echo all around me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. Before I could move, the figure shifted. Slowly, it turned its head toward me. I'll never forget the face, pale, with empty, blackened eyes and a twisted grin that seemed to stretch too wide. The humming grew louder, and I swear the shadows in the room started to move, creeping toward me like they were alive. I read, and I didn't care about the noise I made or whether I tripped over debris. I sprinted down the hall, through the broken doors, and into the safety of the night. My friends laughed when they saw me, thinking I was just spooked by the dark, but I couldn't even speak. I just pointed to the car, and we left. I haven't been back to that hospital since. Sometimes I think about what I saw and try to convince myself it was just a squatter or a weird shadow. But deep down, I know that whatever was in that room was a human, and it wasn't alone. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't truly alone anymore. It started small, little things I chalked up to paranoia. My bedroom door, which I always closed, would be slightly ajar when I woke up. My keys, left on the kitchen counter, would somehow end up on the coffee table. It was enough to unsettle me, but not enough to convince me something was wrong. Then came the dreams. Every night, I'd find myself back in that hospital, wandering its endless halls. The walls seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in impossible ways. In no matter which direction I went, I'd always end up back in that operating room. The figure would be there, waiting, humming that same awful tune. It would smile at me with that too wide grin, and I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. After a particularly bad night, I confided in my friend Rachel, the only one who seemed to take my fears seriously. She suggested I might have picked up some sort of spiritual hitchhiker and urged me to cleanse myself and my space. It sounded ridiculous, but at that point, I was desperate for anything to make it stop. Rachel brought over sage and a bundle of candles. We performed the cleansing in my apartment, her chanting some words she'd googled while I nervously followed her instructions. For a moment, the air in my apartment felt lighter and I thought maybe it worked. But that night, the dream changed. Instead of wandering the hospital, I found myself in my bedroom. Everything looked normal, except for one detail. The figure was standing in the corner, exactly where my dresser should have been. It didn't hum this time. It just stared at me with those empty eyes and that horrible grin. When it finally moved, it didn't lunge or attack. It simply raised a hand and pointed at me. I woke up to the sound of my closet door creaking open. Terrified, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. My closet was empty, just clothes and shoes, but the air in the room felt wrong, heavy, like something was watching me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I called Rachel and she suggested we visit a local medium she knew. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but at this point, I had no better options. The medium, a quiet woman named Linda, listened as I explained what happened. She didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully and asked a few questions about the hospital. When I finished, she sat in silence for a moment before saying, "You encountered something that didn't want to be found, and now it's attached to you." My stomach dropped. What do I do? Linda explained that whatever I'd seen wasn't a ghost. It was something darker, something that fed on fear. She believed it followed me because my panic during the encounter made me an easy target. She offered to perform a ritual to sever the connection, but she warned me it wouldn't be easy. The entity wouldn't want to let go. The ritual took place that evening. Linda burned herbs and drew symbols on the floor of her small shop. I sat in the center, holding a candle, while she chanted in a language I didn't recognize. As the ritual progressed, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air grew cold, and for a brief moment, I swore I heard the humming again, faint but unmistakable. Then everything stopped. Linda opened her eyes and smiled, though she looked exhausted. "It's gone," she said, "but you need to stay away from places like that. You might not be so lucky next time." I haven't had the dream since that night, and nothing strange has happened in my apartment, but I still can't bring myself to go near the old hospital. Sometimes, when I drive past it, I feel a pull like it's calling me back. I don't know if it's curiosity or something darker, but I'll never go back inside. Not after what I saw, not after what followed me home. Life slowly returned to normal after the ritual, though I couldn't shake the lingering unease. It was like a shadow on the edge of my mind, a quiet reminder of what I'd been through. I avoided talking about it, even with Rachel, and for the most part, my friends seemed to have forgotten the whole thing. But a few months later, something happened that made my stomach drop. I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from a local urban explorer. He was known for documenting creepy, abandoned places around town, and his latest upload was titled "Inside the Old Hospital: The Truth About the Rumors." My hand shook as I clicked on it. The video started innocuously enough, shots of the graffiti-covered walls, the debris-strewn floors, and the crumbling hallways I knew all too well. But when he entered the operating room, I froze. The gurney was still there, as rusted and grimy as I remembered. The room was bathed in the same eerie light, but there was no sign of the figure. At first, the explorer panned his camera around, narrating his findings, when he paused and whispered, "What the hell is that?" The camera zoomed in on the far corner of the room, where a shadow seemed to move. It wasn't like the play of light through broken windows, it was deliberate, purposeful. The explorer laughed nervously, chalking it up to his imagination, and continued filming. But the shadow didn't stay in the corner. As he moved to exit the room, the shadow followed, stretching unnaturally along the wall. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it trail behind him, disappearing whenever he turned around but reappearing when he wasn't looking. The video ended abruptly with the explorer saying, "Alright, that's enough for tonight. This place is giving me the creeps." He laughed, but his voice sounded strained. I couldn't sleep that night. The video confirmed what I already knew. Whatever I'd seen in that hospital was still there. But the worst part, the comments. One person wrote, "I've been there before and I saw something similar. Be careful, it might not stay at the hospital." Another said, "That shadow thing followed me home. Took weeks to get rid of it." My heart sank. I thought I was free of it, but now I wasn't so sure. Had the ritual worked, or had it simply hidden itself, waiting for the right moment to return? Over the next few weeks, little things started happening again. My lights would flicker even when the weather was fine. Doors that I knew I'd locked would be slightly ajar, and the dreams came back, not every night, but often enough to make me dread falling asleep. In the dreams, I wasn't in the hospital anymore. Instead, I was in my apartment, but it didn't feel like my apartment. The air was heavy, and the shadows seemed alive, shifting and moving like they had minds of their own. I'd wake up in a panic, feeling watched. One night, I woke up to the sound of faint humming. My heart stopped. I sat up, straining to hear, but the sound was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I'd been dreaming, and the noise lingered as I woke up. But deep down, I knew better. The final straw came a week later. I was sitting on my couch, watching TV, when I saw it in the reflection of the screen. For a split second, I swore I saw a figure standing behind me, its face stretched into that same awful grin. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. That was it. I packed a bag and left that night, driving to Rachel's place without even calling ahead. She let me stay, and I told her everything that had been happening. She believed me, but her face was pale as she listened. I think it's time we go back to Linda, she said. I haven't been back to my apartment since. Linda performed another cleansing, this time warning me that the entity might not be tied to a location anymore. It could be tied to me. She gave me a small talisman to wear, something she said would protect me, but her expression told me she wasn't entirely sure. It's been a year now. For the most part, things have been quiet, but every now and then I catch a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, or I hear a faint hum when the house is silent. I don't know if it's my imagination or something worse. What I do know is this: some places are better left alone, and if you ever find yourself standing at the threshold of an abandoned hospital, don't go inside. You might not come out the same. I used to work late shifts at a mid-sized tech company located in a quiet business district. Our office was on the 18th floor of a 22-story building, and by the time I left each night, the building was almost entirely deserted. The only sounds were the occasional hum of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. One night, I stayed later than usual, finishing up a report due the next morning. By the time I powered down my computer and grabbed my bag, it was past 11 p.m. The building felt unnervingly empty as I walked to the elevator. When the door slid open, the elevator was empty, exactly what I expected at that hour. I stepped inside, pressed the ground floor button, and leaned against the wall, staring at my phone to distract myself from the eerie silence. The ride down started normally, but somewhere around the 14th floor, the elevator jerked to a halt. I sighed, assuming it was just one of those old building quirks. Then, the doors opened. The hallway beyond was dark, not dim, pitch black, the kind of darkness where your eyes can't adjust because there's nothing to see. But something felt off. The air that seeped into the elevator was cold, almost damp, and carried an earthy smell, like wet soil. I stepped forward instinctively, squinting into the blackness. When I saw it, a pair of faintly glowing eyes. At least, I think they were eyes. They hovered in the darkness, unblinking, staring straight at me. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and confusion. I froze, unable to process what I was looking at. Before I could move, the doors began to close. I scrambled back inside just as they shut. My heart pounded as the elevator continued its descent. It should have been over. I told myself I was just tired, my brain playing tricks on me. But when the elevator passed the 10th floor without stopping, my fear returned. I checked the panel. None of the buttons were lit. It was like the elevator had a mind of its own. It didn't stop at the ground floor or the lobby. Instead, it kept descending past the basement levels listed on the panel. My phone had no signal, so I couldn't call for help. I pressed the emergency button repeatedly, but nothing happened. The elevator finally stopped with a soft ding. The doors opened again, revealing nothing, just more of that same Inkai blackness, as if the building ended here. But I felt a presence. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. Then a whisper, "Come out." The voice was soft, almost inviting, but it sent chills down my spine. I stayed rooted to the spot, gripping the elevator rails so tightly my knuckles turned white. The air in the elevator grew colder, and the smell of wet soil intensified. When I didn't move, the whisper came again, louder this time, "Come out." I hit the closed door button repeatedly, my other hand clutching my bag like it was a lifeline. After what felt like an eternity, the doors finally slid shut. The elevator jolted back to life, rising this time. It deposited me on the lobby floor without any issue. The doors opened to the familiar, brightly lit lobby. I practically sprinted out of the building, not daring to look back. The next morning, I told the building's maintenance team about the strange experience. They looked puzzled, claiming there was no basement below the second sublevel and no records of elevator malfunctions. After that night, I started noticing little things that made me uneasy. It began subtly. The elevator would hesitate for a split second when I stepped inside, like it was deciding whether or not to let me on. Sometimes, I'd hear faint clicking noises from the control panel, even when no one was pressing buttons. I tried taking the stairs a few times, but it was almost worse. The stairwell had its own eerie vibe, with its echoing footsteps and flickering lights. Once, I thought I heard someone walking behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. The real breaking point came about 2 weeks after the initial incident. I had sworn off staying late at the office, but deadlines don't always care about your trauma. That evening, I found myself alone again, packing up after another long day. The office felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was watching me. When I approached the elevator, the doors opened before I even pressed the button. The car was empty, as always, but something about it felt rugged. The lights inside seemed dimmer than usual, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth again. I hesitated, debating whether to take the stairs, but the thought of that dark stairwell wasn't any more appealing. Telling myself I was being ridiculous, I stepped inside. Big mistake. The ride down started smoothly, and for a moment, I allowed myself to relax. But then the elevator elevator stopped abruptly at the 14th floor, the same floor as before. My heart sank as the doors slid open. This time, the hallway wasn't pitch black. It was illuminated by the same fluorescent lights as the rest of the building, but it was completely empty. No desks, no walls, no carpet, just an endless, sterile corridor stretching into infinity. And the whisper came again. Come out. My breath hitched. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The voice wasn't inviting this time. It was insistent, demanding. The air felt oppressive, like it was pressing against my chest, trying to force me forward. I don't know how I managed it, but I hit the close door button again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep my finger on it. The doors began to close, but just before they shut completely, something darted past the threshold. It was fast, so fast I couldn't see what it was, but I felt it. A cold gust of air brushed against my leg, and I swear I heard a low growl. The elevator didn't move. The lights flickered violently, plunging me into near darkness. And then I felt it, a presence standing right behind me. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, breathing down my neck. Come out, it whispered again, but this time, it sounded like it was right in my ear. I've lost it. I slammed every button on the control panel, praying for the elevator to move. Suddenly, with a jolt, it shot downward so fast I thought my stomach would flip inside out. The whispering stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The elevator finally screeched to a halt. The doors opened, and I stumbled out onto the lobby floor, gasping for air. The lobby was quiet, the security guard absent, and the front doors already locked for the night. I didn't care. I ran to the nearest exit, banging on it until someone passing outside noticed and let me out. I haven't been back to that building since. I quit my job the next day without even returning for my things. Whatever was in that elevator, whatever it wanted, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I've told a few close friends about what happened, and while most of them think I was just overtired or overworked, I know what I experienced was real. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that voice in my dreams, soft, insistent, and chilling. Come out. The dreams didn't stop after I quit my job. If anything, they grew more vivid. In them, I was always back in the elevator, staring at the doors as they opened onto that endless, sterile corridor. The voice never varied. It was always the same whisper, soft but commanding. Come out. But in the dreams, I could never resist. My legs would move on their own, dragging me into the hallway no matter how hard I fought. And every time I stepped out, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like I'd been running for hours. About a month after leaving the job, I decided to see a therapist. I couldn't sleep, I was constantly on edge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. I didn't mention the elevator at first, I just talked about the stress of work and my nightmares. The therapist suggested it might be a manifestation of burnout, and for a while, I believed her. But then the strange things started happening again. It began with small, inexplicable events around my apartment. Lights would flicker when I entered a room, even though I'd replaced the bulbs recently. My phone alarm would go off at random hours, always at 11:14 p.m. or a.m., exactly the time the elevator stopped on the 14th floor that night. Once, I came home to find my front door unlocked, even though I was certain I'd locked it before leaving. The worst incident happened about 2 weeks ago. I was in my kitchen, washing dishes, when I heard the sound of the elevator ding, the exact same chime from my old office building. The sound shouldn't have been possible. I live in a small, one-story apartment with no elevator. I froze, my hand still submerged in soapy water. The ding echoed again, louder this time, as if it was coming from right outside my front door. My stomach dropped. Against every ounce of better judgment, I crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. Then, I heard it. That whisper, faint but unmistakable. Come out. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself as I scrambled to lock the door. I turned every lock, latched the chain, and even shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst. The whisper didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but it seeped into my mind like it was coming from inside me. Come out. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up on the floor, rocking back and forth. Eventually, the whisper faded, leaving me in an oppressive silence. I didn't sleep that night, and I haven't slept much since. Now, I'm terrified to leave my apartment. Every time I step outside, I feel like something is watching me, waiting. Even in broad daylight, I'll catch glimpses of shadows in my peripheral vision or hear faint, echoey whispers when there's no one around. I've thought about moving, but deep down, I know it won't help. Whatever this is, it's not bound to a place, it's bound to me. It wants me to step into that endless hallway, and I'm afraid that if it gets the chance, I won't be able to stop myself. I don't know what's waiting for me on the other side, but I know one thing for sure. It won't stop until I find out. This happened about 2 years ago when I was still living in my old apartment on the second floor of a small, aging complex. It was a quiet area, mostly families and retirees, so I always felt safe there. That night, though, changed everything. I was in my bedroom scrolling through my phone, the faint hum of my fan filling the otherwise silent room. My window overlooked a small alley that separated my building from another, and because my curtains were sheer, I'd often catch glimpses of cats or raccoons wandering through the shadows. That night, though, I noticed something strange. A light flickered briefly in the alley, like the beam of a flashlight, then vanished. Furious but not overly concerned, I dismissed it as someone walking by. Minutes later, I heard a faint tapping noise. It was rhythmic and deliberate, not the random sound of branches or rain. I froze, realizing it was coming from my window. My heart started racing, but I told myself to stay calm. It's probably just a tree branch, I thought, except there were no trees near my window. Gathering some courage, I got out of bed and walked cautiously toward the window. The tapping stopped as I got closer. I stood there for a moment, my breath fogging the glass, trying to peer into the darkness of the alley. Nothing, just the faint outline of dumpsters and the glow of a distant streetlight. Then I saw it, a face. It was pressed against the glass, pale and distorted by the window pane, with wide, unblinking eyes staring directly at me. I let out a scream and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my nightstand. The face didn't move, didn't react, just stayed there, staring. My mind raced. This was the second floor. How could anyone be outside my window? My building didn't have any fire escapes, and there was no ledge to stand on. The only thing near my window was an old drain pipe, but it didn't seem sturdy enough to hold anyone. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I managed to call 911, barely able to get the words out as I tried to keep my eyes on the window. The operator assured me police were on their way, but the few minutes it took for them to arrive felt like hours. When the officers showed up, they searched the alley thoroughly. No one was there. They checked the drain pipe, but it was rusted and loose, making it impossible for anyone to climb. The officers chalked it up to a prank or my imagination, but I knew what I saw. The next day, I asked my downstairs neighbor if they had seen or heard anything unusual. She looked at me, her face pale, and said, "I didn't want to scare you, but a few nights ago, I thought I saw someone on the roof. I figured it was a maintenance worker, but now I'm not so sure." After moving out, I tried to put the incident behind me, but it lingered in my mind like a stubborn shadow. I'd find myself looking over my shoulder more often, double checking locks, and sleepy with the blinds tightly shut. I'd even stopped taking late night walks, something I used to enjoy. It felt like a piece of that encounter followed me, whispering doubts and unease into my life. About 6 months later, I was scrolling through local news when a headline caught my eye: "Man arrested for breaking and entering through apartment windows." My stomach dropped. The article detailed a string of incidents in the area, all involving a man who managed to climb buildings and enter through second or even third floor windows. The report mentioned he'd been seen lurking around alleyways and using drain pipes or balconies to access his targets. I read the article with growing horror. It didn't confirm where he'd been caught, but the locations matched the area of my old apartment. The man's description was vague: average height, average build, but one detail stood out. Witnesses mentioned his unnervingly blank stare. My heart raced as I recalled the face pressed against my window, those wide, unblinking eyes. Could it have been him? I reached out to the police, explaining my experience, but they seemed nonchalant. They thanked me for my information but didn't provide any reassurance. "It's likely connected," the officer said casually, "but he's in custody now, so there's no need to worry." Except, I still do. A week later, I was home alone in my new apartment, a cozy unit on the 4th floor of a modern building. It had secure entrances, video intercoms, and a balcony overlooking a busy street. Everything that felt safer than my old place. That night, as I was settling into bed, I heard it again. The tapping. It was faint at first, so soft that I thought I was imagining it, but then it became louder, more insistent. My blood ran cold. There was no way anyone could be at my window, not on the 4th floor, not here. Slowly, I turned my head toward the balcony door. The curtain swayed slightly, even though the glass was shut. My heart thundered as I crept closer, my phone already in my hand, dialing 911 again. Just as I reached the door, the tapping stopped. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. They reached out to yank the curtain open. Nothing, just the empty balcony. I stood there, staring out into the night, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. For a moment, I felt foolish, like I let my imagination get the better of me. But as I turned to walk away, I saw it, a faint smudge on the outside of the glass, as if someone had pressed their palm against it. I didn't sleep that night. The police arrived quickly and searched the building, but again, they found nothing. They assured me that my apartment was secure and that no one could have gotten onto the balcony. Yet, the smudge remained, a chilling reminder that someone or something had been there. I moved again shortly after. Life in my new place was peaceful for a while. The building was as secure as I could imagine, keycard access, 24/7 security cameras, and no balconies or alleyways nearby. I started to sleep better, convincing myself that the tapping and the smudges were behind me. Maybe it really had been a strange coincidence. I told myself, maybe the guy from the news really was the one at my old window. But deep down, I knew I wasn't entirely convinced. Then came the night that shattered the fragile sense of safety I'd built. It started innocently enough. I was working late at my desk, finishing up a report for work. My new apartment didn't have much of a view, just a blank wall from the neighboring building about 15 feet away. I rarely looked out at the window because there wasn't much to see. As I worked, I noticed a faint flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I froze, staring at the window, but saw nothing. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination, the result of too much caffeine and too little sleep. I returned to my work, then I saw it again. This time, I didn't ignore it. I turned my desk lamp off to reduce the glare on the glass and leaned closer to the window. My heart sank into my stomach. There, faint but unmistakable, was a figure. It was standing in the narrow space between my building and the neighboring wall, staring up at my window. The figure was impossibly still, like a statue, and completely silent. I couldn't make out their features in the dim light, but I didn't need to. It was them, the window watcher. I scrambled for my phone, dialing the building's security desk. As I spoke to the guard, my eyes stayed glued to the figure. "There's someone outside my window," I whispered, my voice shaking. "On the ground, between the buildings." The guard assured me he'd check the cameras and send someone to investigate. I hung up and forced myself to keep looking at the figure, afraid that if I looked away, it would disappear, or worse, move closer. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hall and a knock at my door. It was the security guard. I quickly let him in and pointed to the window, but when we looked, the figure was gone. The guard went down to check the area while I watched from the safety of my apartment. He shone his flashlight into the narrow gap between the buildings, but it was empty. He came back up, shaking his head. "I don't see how anyone could have been standing there," he said. "It's too narrow, and there's no way in or out without climbing several stories." I showed him the spot where I'd seen the figure, and we reviewed the security footage together. To my horror, the camera pointed toward my building showed something moving in the shadows between the walls, but the angle wasn't clear enough to make out any details. The guard tried to reassure me, but his nervous expression said otherwise. He promised to keep an eye on the cameras and patrol the building more frequently, but I knew that wasn't enough. Whoever or whatever this was, it had found me again. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, every light in my apartment blazing, clutching a baseball bat I'd bought years ago for self-defense. Every creak and groan of the building sent a jolt of fear through me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I called my boss and took a leave of absence. Within a week, I broke my lease and moved across the country, leaving behind everything that felt familiar in an attempt to escape whatever this was. It's been over a year since then, and I haven't had any more encounters. But I don't think it's over. I keep my curtains closed, my windows locked, and my security cameras running at all times. Every now and then, though, I feel it, the heavy weight of unseen eyes on me. And when I do, I can't help but wonder if it's only a matter of time before the tapping starts again. I just graduated from college and landed my first real job, so the place wasn't exactly luxurious, but it was affordable and felt safe enough. Or so I thought. The building was mostly filled with retirees or people who kept to themselves. The only neighbor I really noticed was the person in the apartment next to mine, Unit 3B. I never actually saw them, but I often heard faint music playing through the wall, always classical. It gave the apartment a weirdly cultured vibe, and I appreciated the white noise while I worked from home. One night, I was up late finishing a report for work. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I heard something strange, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was someone walking down the hall, but it didn't fade away like footsteps. Instead, it stayed constant, almost like it was right outside my door. Curious but cautious, I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Shrugging it off as my tired brain playing tricks, I went back to work. The next morning, I noticed something odd. A small pile of dirt was right outside my door. I brushed it off as someone tracking in mud, but it stuck in my mind because it seemed too deliberate, almost like it was placed there on purpose. Over the next few weeks, small things started happening. I'd find my doormat slightly moved or see faint scratches on my doorframe. Once, I even heard whispering outside, but when I opened the door, no one was there. I began feeling uneasy, but I told myself it was nothing. Then one night, things escalated. I had just gotten into bed when I heard the music next door stop abruptly. That wasn't unusual, but what followed was a loud, deliberate knock on my wall, right where my bed was. I froze. It was the kind of knock that wasn't random. It felt purposeful, like someone was trying to get my attention. I didn't move, hoping they'd just go away, but but then I heard something else, the faint sound of a door creaking open. Not mine, but the one next door. The hallway light seeped under my door, and I heard soft footsteps approaching. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator kept me calm while I whispered what was happening. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could see a shadow under the gap, someone standing there, waiting. Then there was a soft scrape, like something metallic dragging across the wood. The police arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. When they knocked, the shadow disappeared, and I heard the door to Unit 3B slam shut. The officers checked my apartment, and they went next door. Here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. Unit 3B was empty. The landlord confirmed that no one had lived there for over a year. The place was completely unfurnished, coated in dust. Yet, inside, the police found signs of someone squatting, cans of food, a sleeping bag, and worst of all, a journal. The journal had pages filled with ramblings, mostly incoherent, but my name was mentioned several times. It talked about watching me, learning my schedule, and waiting for the right moment. After moving out, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of a floorboard or flicker of a shadow would send my heart racing. I started sleepy with my phone next to me and a heavy flashlight under my pillow. It felt like paranoia, but after what happened, I figured I had the right to be on edge. I hadn't told many people about the incident, just my parents and a couple of close friends. Most of them were supportive, but one friend, Rachel, seemed particularly concerned. She was the kind of person who loved true crime and had a knack for thinking like an investigator. "Have you ever considered that this might not be random?" she asked one evening when we were catching up. "I mean, they had your name at that journal. That's personal. I hadn't considered it. To me, it was just some creep who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." But Rachel's words stuck with me, and I started to replay everything in my head. The journal, the dirt outside my door, a deliberate knocks. Then I remembered something. A few weeks before everything started, I had received a weird package in the mail. It was an unmarked box with no return address, just my name scrawled across it in uneven handwriting. Inside was a single, dusty Polaroid of a forest. No note, no explanation. At the time, I thought it was just a prank or a mix-up. Now, I wasn't so sure. I dug through my things until I found the Polaroid. Holding it up to the light, I noticed something I hadn't before, something etched into the corner of the photo. It was faint, but when I tilted it just right, I could make out the words, "Remember me." Chills ran down my spine, and I had no idea what it meant, but it felt personal. Too personal. I decided to show it to Rachel. She examined it carefully, flipping it over and holding it at different angles. "This isn't random," she said finally. "Someone's trying to send a message. But who? And why?" My mind raced through the possibilities. I wasn't the type to make enemies. I didn't owe anyone money, and I hadn't been in any dramatic relationships. I was just a regular person living a quiet life. Rachel suggested we report the photo to the police, but when I brought it to the station, the officer on duty didn't seem too interested. "It's creepy," he admitted, "but unless there's a direct threat, there's not much we can do." Weeks turned into months, and I tried to move on. I threw out the Polaroid, changed my phone number, and even deleted most of my social media accounts. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least it seemed to. But then, about 6 months after I moved out, I found another package on my doorstep. This one was smaller, wrapped in plain brown paper. My stomach dropped as I picked it up. There was no address, no markings, just my name in the same uneven handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a key, old, rusted, and tied to a small tag that read 3B. That's when I realized it wasn't over. Whoever this person was, they weren't done with me, and they wanted me to know it. After receiving the package with the key, my fight or flight instinct kicked into overdrive. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and every creak of the floorboards or knock on the door sent me spiraling into panic. It felt like my life was unraveling. I decided it was time to stop being reactive and start taking action. I called Rachel, who immediately offered to come over and help me figure out my next steps. When she arrived, we laid out everything I knew: the journal from Unit 3B, the Polaroid, the new package, and of course, the key. Rachel studied the key carefully. "If this is really the key to 3B, we need to find out what's in there. Something this person left behind." "You're joking," I said, horrified. "I'm not going back to that place." "You don't have to," Rachel said. "But I will." I argued with her, but Rachel was adamant. She wanted to get to the bottom of this just as much as I did. Eventually, I caved, on the condition that we'd go during the day and that I'd call the police if anything seemed even remotely off. The next morning, we drove to the old apartment complex. Just being there made my skin crawl, but Rachel was unfazed. She walked straight to the front door, key in hand, and turned to me with a reassuring smile. "Stay put," she said. "I'll be quick." I watched her disappear inside. The minutes dragged on, and my anxiety grew with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reemerged, her face pale and her hand hands shaking. She was clutching a small, weathered notebook. "You need to see this," she said, her voice trembling. We got back to my place and sat at the kitchen table as Rachel opened the notebook. It was filled with the same messy handwriting as the journal the police had found. Most of it was gibberish, fragments of sentences and strange symbols, but a few pages stood out. On one page, there was a list of names. Mine was circled, with a date written next to it, the day I moved into the apartment. On another page, there was a crude sketch of my old door, complete with the scratches I'd noticed months earlier. But the final page was the worst. It simply read, "I'm waiting." Rachel and I stared at each other in stunned silence. Whoever this person was, they had been planning something for a long time, and the fact that they'd managed to find me even after I moved meant they were still out there, watching. I called the police again, and this time, they took it more seriously. They promised to investigate further and stationed an officer near my apartment for a few nights. But despite their efforts, nothing ever came of it. The trail went cold. For weeks, I was a nervous wreck, jumping at every shadow and double-checking every lock. But eventually, the packages stopped, and life began to settle down again. I moved to a new city, started therapy, and tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. It's been 2 years now, and I haven't received any more mysterious packages or seen any signs of the person from 3B. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that rhythmic tapping in my head, and I can't help but wonder if, someday, I'll open my door to find another package waiting for me. My friend, Emily, was renovating her house, but the interior was mostly livable. She just asked me to keep an eye on things, water her plants, and make sure no one messed with the construction materials outside. Simple enough. The house was a 2-story, modern-style build with large windows that overlooked the forest. The backyard wasn't fenced in yet, and beyond it was nothing but trees. At night, the place felt eerily isolated, but I brushed it off as nerves. I was doing Emily a favor, and I wasn't about to back out over a little spookiness. On my second night there, I was in the living room scrolling on my phone when I heard a faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere upstairs. I froze, my mind racing with every horror story I'd ever read. After a few seconds of silence, I convinced myself it was just the wind or some creaky part of the unfinished house. But then it happened again, this time louder. I grabbed the flashlight Emily had left by the door and crept upstairs. The tapping seemed to be coming from one of the empty rooms at the back of the house. My heart pounded as I pushed open the door, half expecting to see, I don't know, a bird or a loose branch hitting the window. Instead, the room was empty. Relieved but still uneasy, I turned to leave. That's when I noticed something odd. Faint footprints in the layer of construction dust on the floor. They weren't mine. I hadn't been in this room since I arrived, and these prints led to the closet. My stomach dropped. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I yanked the closet door open, ready to swing the flashlight like a bat. The closet was empty, too. No sign of anyone. The footprints ended there. I hurried back downstairs, triple-checked that all the doors were locked, and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe the prints were old, left by a worker before I arrived. Yeah, that had to be it. Except that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard it again. The same tapping. This time, it was coming from the walls. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my keys, bolted out of the house, and drove to a nearby diner where I stayed until morning. When I told Emily what happened, she was surprisingly calm. She explained that she'd heard the tapping before but had always assumed it was just the house settling or animals in the walls. She promised to have it checked out when she got back. A few weeks later, Emily called me, her voice shaking. During a routine inspection, the contractor found a small crawl space behind the upstairs closet. It wasn't on the blueprints, and it wasn't part of the original design. Inside, they found a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a notebook filled with detailed notes about the house and about Emily. Emily told me she handed the notebook over to the police, who took it very seriously. According to her, the notes weren't just about the house's layout or the construction schedule, they were about her. Things like what time she usually got home, her favorite meals, and even her sleeping habits. One entry chilled me to the bone. The friend staying over doesn't follow the same routine. She's skittish, keeps checking the doors. I'll wait until she leaves. The police searched the property but didn't find anyone. They suspected whoever it was had been living in the crawl space for a while, using the construction as a cover to come and go. The unfinished nature of the house, combined with the isolated location, made it the perfect hideout. Emily had the crawl space sealed off and installed security cameras throughout the property. She also moved in with her parents for a while just to feel safe again. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was had been watching me too, waiting, studying. I replayed the nights I stayed there over and over in my head, wondering how close they might have been. Months passed, and life went back to normal, at least on the surface. Emily eventually returned to her house, and we tried to laugh it off as a creepy story to share at parties. But deep down, I think we both knew it was more than that. About 6 months later, I got a call from Emily. She sounded panicked. "Did you get one too?" she asked. "One what?" I said, my heart sinking looking. A note, she whispered. It was on my porch this morning and it just said, I missed the view. I didn't get a note, but that didn't make me feel any safer. Whoever had been in that crawl space had moved on, but the thought of them still lurking, still watching, keeps me awake at night. After Emily found the note, we both went into full panic mode. She immediately called the police, who treated it as a stalking case. They combed through the security footage from the cameras she had installed, but frustratingly, there was nothing out of the ordinary. No one had been caught on video approaching the house. It was as if the note had just materialized out of thin air. I decided to stay with Emily for a few nights. I didn't want her to be alone, and honestly, I didn't feel safe in my own place anymore. We kept every light on in the house, double-checked all the locks, and even slept in shifts, one of us staying awake to keep watch. They felt ridiculous, like we were in some low-budget horror movie, but the fear was all too real. On the third night, around 2 a.m., I was on watch while Emily slept on the couch next to me. The house was dead silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I was scrolling on my phone, trying to keep myself awake, when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I froze. It was subtle at first, just the faintest shadow shifting across the backyard. I turned off my phone screen and stared out the massive windows, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal, but then I saw it again, a figure low to the ground, moving toward the house. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just watched, paralyzed with fear as the figure crept closer. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, crawling on all fours, slowly and deliberately, as if trying not to be seen. My brain screamed at me to do something, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I felt like I was glued to the spot. Then the figure stopped. It turned its head toward the window, and even in the dim light, I could see its face. Pale, expressionless, watching. I finally snapped out of my trance and scrambled to wake Emily. She bolted upright as I whispered what I'd seen. She grabbed her phone and called the police while I kept my eyes glued to the window. The figure was gone. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, the backyard was empty. They found footprints in the dirt outside the window, but nothing else. Whoever it was had vanished into the woods. Emily decided to leave the house for good after that. She moved in with her parents permanently and put the property up for sale. We never found out who the person was or why they were there. The police suspected it might have been the same individual from the crawl space, returning to torment her, or maybe it was someone else entirely. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory of that pale face staring through the window. And to that figure in the woods, whoever you are, let's not meet. I grew up in a quiet, suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened, the kind of place where kids rode bikes until sunset and neighbors waved while mowing their lawns. But there was one oddity on our street, the house at the end of Willow Lane. It wasn't abandoned, but it might as well have been. The shutters hung crooked, the paint peeled in strips, and the lawn was overgrown with weeds taller than I was. We used to dare each other to run up and touch the door. No one ever did. It was said that a woman named Mrs. Havisham lived there, though none of us had ever seen her. My parents brushed off the rumors as kids' overactive imaginations, but there were always stories about strange lights flickering in the windows at odd hours or muffled voices drifting from the house on still nights. One summer evening, curiosity got the better of me. My friend Liz and I were sitting on her porch, daring each other to finally investigate the house. After much nervous laughter, we decided to go. Armed with flashlights, we crept down the street, adrenaline coursing through us. The closer we got, the quieter the world seemed to become. The crickets and cicadas, so loud moments before, went silent. Even the air felt heavier. The house loomed before us, its shadow stretching across the cracked sidewalk. Liz was braver than me, or at least she pretended to be. She marched up to the front gate and pushed it open with a loud creak. I followed, my heart hammering in my chest. Let's just peek through a window, she whispered, as if the house could hear us. We moved toward the side of the house where a single window was half covered by a threadbare curtain. Liz pressed her face to the glass, cupping her hands around her eyes. Suddenly, she stumbled back, her face pale. What is it? I whispered. There's someone sitting in there, she said, her voice shaking. I couldn't stop myself. I had to see. I leaned forward and peered inside. The room was dimly lit, but I could make out a figure, an impossibly tall man standing in the corner, his back to the window. His posture was unnaturally rigid, like a mannequin, and then his head turned slightly, just enough for me to see the outline of his face. Except it wasn't a face. It was smooth, blank. Before I could scream, Liz grabbed my arm and yanked me away. We ran as fast as we could, not stopping until we were back on her porch. We didn't tell anyone. Who would believe us? But the next morning, the house at the end of Willow Lane was gone. Not boarded up, not demolished, just gone. In its place was an empty lot, as though the house had never existed. Over the years, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that we'd both gotten spooked and concocted some elaborate memory to explain what we thought we saw. Life moved on, and I left my childhood home behind, moving to another city for college and eventually settling down in a small apartment of my own. But the memory of that night stayed with me, buried deep but always there, like a splintered just under the skin. Then, last month, it happened again. I was walking home from a late shift at work. My neighborhood isn't as quaint as the one I grew up in, but it's quiet and safe enough. The streets were deserted, lit only by the occasional street lamp. As I rounded the corner to my block, I saw a house I didn't recognize. It sat at the end of the street where there should have been an empty lot. It looked eerily familiar: peely paint, broken shutters, and overgrown lawn. My stomach dropped. It was the house. I froze. My mind raced with excuses. Maybe I was tired, or my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I stared at it, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The window on the side of the house had the same threadbare curtain, and it moved. The curtain twitched, as if someone had brushed past it. I couldn't breathe. My feet felt rooted to the ground, but my brain screamed at me to run. Before I could make a decision, the front door creaked open. A figure stepped out, tall and impossibly thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was the same thing I'd seen all those years ago, the blank-faced man. He stood on the porch, his head tilting slightly as though he were listening for something. Then he started walking toward me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the sound of heavy, uneven footsteps following me. My apartment was only a few blocks away, but it felt like miles. When I finally reached my building, I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. I slammed the door shut behind me and bolted it, pressing my back against the cool wood as I tried to catch my breath. The footsteps had stopped. I peeked through the peephole, expecting to see the street empty, but instead, he was there, standing just outside the door. His head tilted slightly, as if he could see me through the tiny lens. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the middle of my living room with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife and praying for dawn. When the sun finally rose, he was gone. I reported it to the police, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. Now, every night, I check my locks twice. I leave no windows uncovered, no lights off. But sometimes, in the silence, I hear faint, uneven footsteps outside my door, and I know he's still watching. I've tried to move on with my life. Therapy, self-defense classes, even relocating to another part of the city, anything to feel safe again. But the feeling of being watched never truly goes away. It's like a shadow that follows me, just out of sight, but always there. The footsteps outside my door became sporadic, sometimes weeks or even months apart. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining them. Then, one night, I found something slipped under my door, a single piece of paper with a crude drawing of the house at the end of Willow Lane. The details were unmistakable. The broken shutters, the overgrown lawn, the peeling paint, it was all there. I stared at the drawing, my hands trembling. There were no words, no explanation, just the image. I stuffed it into a drawer and tried to convince myself it was a prank, though deep down, I knew better. The next few weeks were quiet. No footsteps, no strange notes. I started to relax, almost believing it was over, until last Tuesday. I was on my way home after dinner with a friend, walking down my apartment hallway when I noticed something odd. My door was ajar. I distinctly remember locking it before I left, double checking as I always do. My stomach churned as I pushed it open cautiously. Everything inside looked normal, nothing was missing or out of place. But then I saw it. On my coffee table was another drawing, this one more detailed. It showed the house again, but this time there was a figure in the window. I recognized him immediately, the blank-faced man. The air felt heavy, suffocating. I grabbed the drawing and bolted out of my apartment, driving straight to my friend Liz's house. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she was the only person who might understand. When she opened the door, she looked shocked to see me. "I need to talk to you," I said, holding up the drawing. Her face went pale. She let me in, and as I explained everything, her hands trembled. When I finished, she pulled out a small box from her closet and handed it to me. Inside were old photos, notes, and another drawing of the house. She'd been getting them too, for years, but she never told anyone. "It never stops," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter where you go or what you do. It finds you." Her words felt like a death sentence. We stayed up all night, comparing stories and trying to piece together what this thing wanted. But the more we talked, the more questions we had. Then, around 3 a.m., there was a knock at her door. We froze. The sound was deliberate, slow, and heavy. "Don't open it," Liz whispered, clutching my arm. But we didn't need to. A moment later, a folded piece of paper slid under the door. Neither of us moved until the footsteps faded away. When we finally worked up the courage to pick it up, it was another drawing. This time, it was of Liz's house. We didn't sleep after that. By dawn, I left, promising to stay in touch. But deep down, I think we both knew there was nothing we could do. Now, every time I pass a quiet street or an overgrown lot, I brace myself, half expecting to see that house standing there again. And when I do, I'll know my time is up. To anyone reading this, if you ever see the house at the end of Willow Lane, walk away. Don't look inside. Don't try to understand. Just leave and hope it doesn't follow you. Because once it finds you, it never lets go. I live in a small mountain town where hiking is a daily ritual for many of us. There's a trail not far from my house that winds through dense pine forests and eventually opens up to a breathtaking overlook. I've walked it dozens of times, always enjoying the solitude and peacefulness of nature, but after what happened a few months ago, I haven't set foot on it since. It was late September, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I decided to go for a quick hike after work to clear my head. The sun was already low in the sky, but I figured I had enough time to make it to the overlook and back before dark. I didn't bring my flashlight, something I'd regret later. The trail was unusually quiet, no birds chirping, no rustling in the bushes, just the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. I chalked it up to the time of year and kept going. About halfway up, I noticed something strange. A little off the trail, there was a pile of rocks stacked neatly in a pyramid shape. It wasn't uncommon to see cairns, but this one seemed odd. The rocks were perfectly balanced, and there was a small wooden figure, a crudely carved stick man, perched on top. It gave me the creeps, but I brushed it off as someone's odd art project and kept moving. The further I went, the more uneasy I felt. I started noticing more of those rock piles, each with a stick figure on top. Some were small and simple, but others were taller, almost human height. They were always just off the trail, hidden enough that you'd only see them if you were really looking. My heart started to race, but I told myself it was just a coincidence, maybe part of some weird trail marker system. By the time I reached the overlook, the sun was setting. The view was as beautiful as ever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the tree line but didn't see anyone. Still, I couldn't enjoy the moment. I turned back almost immediately, wanting to get back to my car before dark. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping sound coming from behind me, like someone gently knocking on a tree. I froze, listening. Tap, 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 then silence. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" No response. I started walking faster, keeping my ears tuned to any noise. The tapping started again, this time closer. My heart was pounding. I broke into a jog, trying to stay calm, but the tapping turned into footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps, matching my pace. I turned my head to look behind me and nearly tripped over my own feet. Standing in the middle of the trail was a figure, tall and shadowy, wearing what looked like a wooden mask. It was too dark to make out any features, but the mask had a crude face carved into it, similar to the stick figures. They didn't move, just stood there, staring. I didn't wait to see what they wanted. I ran as fast as I could, barely able to see the trail in the fading light. My breath was ragged, my legs burning, but I didn't stop. The footsteps followed me, gaining on me. At one point, I swear I heard more than one set. When I finally saw the parking lot, I almost cried with relief. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys. As I started the engine and turned on the headlights, I saw them again. Two figures now, standing at the edge of the woods, their masks glowing eerily in my high beams. They didn't move, just watched as I sped away. I reported the incident to the local authorities, but they didn't find anything. No rock piles, no figures, nothing. They suggested it was a prank or that I had imagined it. Maybe they're right, but I know what I saw. After that night, the trail that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those figures, their unmoving masks, and the way they seemed to blend into the forest like they belonged there. A few weeks later, I started noticing small, unsettling things around my house. A wooden figure showed up on my front porch one morning, propped against the door. It looked just like the ones on the rock piles, its crude limbs outstretched as if reaching for me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some neighborhood kids were playing a joke, but deep down, I knew it wasn't random. Then came the tapping. It started faintly, late at night. At first, I thought it was the wind or a tree branch against the side of the house. But as the nights went on, the tapping grew more deliberate. It would move from one side of the house to the other, slow and steady, like someone was walking the perimeter. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and threw open the back door. Nothing, just the empty yard bathed in pale moonlight. But as I stood there, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, I noticed something near the edge of the woods. A rock pile, like the ones on the trail, with another stick figure perched on top. My blood ran cold. The next morning, I found more of them, one by the mailbox, another near the garage. Each one slightly different, as if someone had spent time crafting them specifically for me. I took pictures and called the police again. They came, looked around, and told me the same thing as before. It was probably a prank, nothing to worry about. They said they'd increase patrols in the area, but I could tell they didn't take me seriously. That evening, I decided to stay with a friend in town. As I packed a bag, I felt a strange sense of relief, like putting distance between myself and the house would keep me safe. But as I locked the door behind me and turned to leave, I froze. In the middle of the driveway stood one of the masked figures. This time, it wasn't alone. Two others flanked it, all of them wearing those horrifying, crude wooden masks. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, blocking my path. My survival instincts kicked in. I dropped my bag, bolted back inside, and locked every door and window I could. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. A dispatcher assured me someone was on their way, but I didn't feel safe. I grabbed a kitchen knife and huddled in the corner of the living room, waiting. It felt like hours before I saw the red and blue lights flashing outside. The police searched the area but found no one. The rock piles and figures were gone, as if they'd never been there. The officers tried to reassure me, but I could see the unease in their eyes. They suggested I stay with someone for a while and promised to keep an eye on the property. I haven't been back to the house since. I sold it a month later, losing money but gaining peace of mind. I moved to a different state, far from the mountains and the woods. I don't hike anymore, and I keep my doors and windows locked at all times. I still don't know who or what those figures were. I don't know if it was a cult, some deranged individuals, or something worse. But I do know this: they wanted me to know they were there. They wanted me to feel watched, hunted. After moving to a different state, I tried to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment in a bustling city, far from any forests or quiet trails. The constant noise of traffic and the distant hum of people gave me comfort. It felt like I could finally disappear into the crowd. For months, I didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary. I even started to think that maybe I'd escaped whatever or whoever it was. But that peace didn't last. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of old belongings, I found something that shouldn't have been there. At the bottom of the box was a small, wooden figure, crude, familiar, and unmistakable. My hands trembled as I held it. I had unpacked this. I was certain of it. My stomach churned at the realization they had found me. I debated calling the police again, but what could I say? That someone had mailed me a stick figure. That wouldn't explain the fear crawling under my skin. I decided to throw it away, hoping that getting rid of it would sever whatever connection they had to me. For a few weeks, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself it was a coincidence or some cruel prank. But then the tapping started again. This time, it was against the windows of my third-floor apartment. Soft, deliberate knocks that seemed to come from outside. My heart raced as I pulled back the curtain, half expecting to see one of those masked figures staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty city street below. The tapping continued every few nights, always at odd hours. I stopped sleeping, spending my nights clutching the knife I kept under my pillow. I even considered moving again, but I couldn't bear the thought of uprooting my life a second time. Instead, I installed security cameras around my apartment. I needed proof, something to show the police if this escalated. The first night with the cameras was uneventful. The second night, however, wasn't. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, my stomach dropped. Around 3 a.m., the camera facing my living room window captured something, or someone, standing on the fire escape. It was too dark to make out details, but the figure was tall and unnervingly still. It didn't knock, didn't try to get inside. It just stood there, staring into my apartment for several minutes before disappearing out of frame. I called the police, showing them the footage. They promised to investigate, but didn't seem optimistic about finding anything. After they left, I realized something chilling. The figure had been standing directly in front of the window where I'd been sitting on the couch. They could see me, but I hadn't noticed them. The next day, I took a drastic step. I quit my job, broke my lease, and moved in with a relative in a completely different part of the country. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I deleted my social media accounts and changed my phone number. I wanted to vanish completely. For a while, it seemed to work. Months passed without any signs of the figures. I started to believe I was free, but just a week ago, I found another rock pile. This time, it was in the backyard of my relative's house, hidden among the trees. On top of the pile was a wooden figure, its tiny arms outstretched. I don't know what they want or how they keep finding me. I don't know if they're human or something else entirely. All I know is that they're relentless. When I was in college, I had an internship with a small-town historical society in the Midwest. It wasn't exactly thrilling work, but I needed the credits. Part of my job involved cataloging old photographs, letters, and maps, and I occasionally got sent to remote properties to document landmarks. One sunny Friday afternoon, my supervisor, Linda, handed me a clipboard with a list of items to photograph at an old Victorian house on Blackberry Lane. She said it had recently been added to the historical registry and the owner was eccentric, but harmless. She chuckled when she said that, which should have been my first red flag. When I arrived at the house, it was even more imposing than I expected. It stood 3 stories tall, its paint peeling in places, with ivy crawling up the walls. The windows seemed to glare down at me like unblinking eyes. I parked my car in the overgrown driveway and walked up to the front porch. The owner, Mr. Whitaker, greeted me at the door. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a stooped posture. He seemed polite, but his movements were jittery, like he was constantly looking over his shoulder. The house has been in my family for generations, instructions, he said as he led me inside, but some things are better left forgotten. Another red flag. The interior smelled musty, like old books and damp wood. The furniture was covered in sheets, and cobwebs draped the corners of the high ceilings. He showed me the areas he wanted me to document: a dusty parlor, an ornate staircase, and an upstairs bedroom with a peculiar circular window. While I was taking photos in the bedroom, I heard a faint creak behind me. I turned around, expecting to see Mr. Whitaker, but the hallway was empty. Old houses make noises, I muttered to myself, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. I finished my work upstairs and headed back down, only to find Mr. Whitaker standing at the foot of the staircase, staring up at me. His expression was blank, almost trance-like. "Are you okay?" I asked nervously. He snapped out of it and gave me a weak smile. "Oh, yes, just reminiscing." He insisted I take photos of the basement before leaving. I hesitated. Something about the basement felt rugged, but I didn't want to seem unprofessional, so I followed him down. The basement was cold and dimly lit, with exposed stone walls and a dirt floor. In the corner stood an antique sewing machine, and beside it, a mirror with a cracked frame. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. As I snapped a photo of the sewing machine, I caught movement in the mirror. It was faint, like a shadow shifting. My heart jumped, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. "Do you feel it?" Mr. Whitaker asked softly. "Feel what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The house," he whispered. "It remembers everything." That was it for me. I mumbled something about having enough photos and bolted up the stairs. Mr. Whitaker didn't try to stop me, but as I reached the front door, he called out, "Be careful what you take with you." I didn't look back. I drove straight home, my hands shaking the entire way. Later that night, as I was editing the photos on my computer, I noticed something. In almost every picture, there was a faint, blurry figure. Sometimes it was in the background, other times near the edge of the frame. It wasn't Mr. Whitaker, it was too tall and thin. The worst one was a shot of the staircase. The figure was standing directly behind me, just a few steps away. I didn't sleep that night. I deleted all the photos and emailed Linda to tell her I wouldn't be returning to Blackberry Lane. She didn't press me for details, and I never asked if anyone else had been sent there since. The days following my visit to Blackberry Lane were filled with an uneasy silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I brought something back with me, even though I deleted every photo. I told myself it was just nerves, a trick of my overactive imagination. But then, things started happening. At first, it was subtle. The door that I knew I had closed would be slightly ajar when I came back into the room. Objects, my keys, a pen, a coffee mug would disappear and reappear in strange places. I chalked it up to stress or forgetfulness. After all, I was a college student juggling classes, work, and an internship. But then one night, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was faint but persistent, like fingernails on wood. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and strained to hear. It was coming from inside my closet. I wanted to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a mouse or a draft, but the sound was too deliberate. Gathering what little courage I had, I got up, turned on the light, and opened the closet door. Nothing. The scratching stopped as soon as the door swung open. My clothes hung neatly on their hangers, and the floor was clear. I exhaled a shaky breath and shut the door, trying to laugh at my paranoia. As I turned back toward my bed, I froze. The mirror above my dresser, one I'd had for years, was fogged up as if someone had breathed on it. Written in the condensation were 3 words: "You saw me." I didn't even scream. I was too terrified. Instead, I grabbed my phone and bolted out of my apartment, spending the rest of the night at my friend Emily's place. I told her what had happened, and while she tried to comfort me, I could tell she thought I was imagining things. The next morning, I returned to my apartment, dreading what I might find. To my relief, the mirror was clear and nothing seemed out of place. For a brief moment, I wondered if I dreamed the whole thing, but the sense of unease never left me. That night, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I googled the history of the house on Blackberry Lane. What I found sent chills down my spine. The house had a dark past. It had belonged to a man named Samuel Whitaker in the late 1800 seconds, a reclusive figure rumored to have dabbled in the occult. Neighbors claimed he conducted strange rituals in the basement and often spoke of keeping the house alive. He vanished under mysterious circumstances, and the house had been abandoned for decades before his distant relative, the current Mr. Whitaker, moved in. I also found an old black and white photo of Samuel Whitaker. My stomach dropped. The tall, thin figure in my photos, the one standing behind me on the staircase, it was him. I decided I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. I packed a bag and went to stay with Emily indefinitely. I didn't tell her everything I discovered. I didn't want to scare her. For weeks, nothing happened. I started to think I was safe. But then, one night while I was alone at Emily's place, I heard the scratching again. This time, it wasn't coming from the closet. It was coming from the window. I turned, dread pulling in my stomach, and saw a faint outline in the glass. It was too dark to make out details, but I knew it was him. I don't remember much after that. Emily said she found me huddled in the corner of the living room the next morning, shaking and incoherent. I begged her to take me to a prehistoric or a psychic, anyone who could help. Eventually, I found a woman who claimed to specialize in spiritual cleansings. She came to Emily's house and performed a ritual, burning sage and chanting in a language I didn't recognize. She told me that whatever had attached itself to me was strong, but it could be banished with time and effort. I've since moved to another state, changed my phone number, and cut ties with the Historical Society. I avoid old houses like the plague, and I still sleep with the lights on. I used to live in a small town surrounded by dense forest. Our house was at the edge of a cul-de-sac, and our backyard blended seamlessly into the woods. It was quiet, peaceful, until it wasn't. One summer evening, I decided to take a walk in the woods behind our house. The trees stretched endlessly, and there were faint trails made by wildlife or, perhaps, the occasional hiker. It was around 6 p.m., and the light was starting to dim. The orange glow of the setting sun filtered through the leaves, creating long, eerie shadows. I was about 15 minutes in when I saw it, a single, old wooden chair sitting in the middle of the trail. It was weathered, like it had been there for years, but I'd never seen it before. Something about it made me uneasy, so I decided to turn around and head back. As I walked, I had this nagging feeling that something was wrong. You know, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck, like you're being watched. I glanced over my shoulder and saw nothing but trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I quickened my pace. Then, I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves, like someone was stepping on them deliberately. I froze. The woods were dead silent, save for my breathing and the faint rustle of leaves. Gathering my courage, I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" No response. I started walking again, faster this time. My heart was pounding. That's when I saw it, another chair, identical to the first, sitting right in the middle of the trail. But this one wasn't old. It looked new, like it had just been placed there. I was sure this trail was a straight shot back to my house. There was no way I'd missed it on the way out. A low hum filled the air, barely audible but distinct, like the sound of electrical wires vibrating. The hair on my arm stood up. I stepped off the trail and started running through the trees, not caring about direction anymore. I just needed to get away. As I sprinted, I could hear the sound of footsteps, no, multiple footsteps, behind me. They weren't running but walking steadily, deliberately, almost as if they knew I couldn't outrun them. I didn't dare look back. After what felt like forever, I broke through the tree line and stumbled into my backyard. I collapsed on the grass, gasping for air. When I finally turned around, the woods were still. Nothing followed me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. The next morning, I told my dad what happened. He laughed it off, saying it was probably just kids playing a prank or my imagination running wild. But I knew what I felt, what I saw. A few days later, I noticed something odd. The woods were eerily silent. No birds, no insects, just silence. I decided to take a peek at the edge of the tree line. I didn't go far, just enough to satisfy my curiosity. And there it was, the chair. It was sitting right at the edge of the woods, facing our house. Over the next few weeks, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, maybe even a cruel prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The chair's placement felt deliberate, purposeful, as though it was waiting for me. The following Saturday, my best friend Jenna came over. I hadn't told her much about what happened, but I decided to mention the chair. She laughed and said, "You're probably overthinking it. Let's go check it out." I was hesitant, but having someone with me made the idea feel less terrifying. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We walked to the edge of the woods. The chair was still there, sitting in the same spot. It looked weathered again, as though it had aged overnight. Jenna, ever the skeptic, shrugged and walked closer to inspect it. It's just a chair," she said, running her fingers along the splintered wood. She turned to me with a playful grin. "What, do you think it's haunted?" I forced a nervous laugh. "I don't know, it's just weird." That's when Jenna's face changed. Her smile faltered, and her eyes darted past me toward the trees. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" I spun around, my stomach dropping. She pointed into the woods. "I swear I saw someone. They were standing right there, behind that tree. There was nothing but shadows and trees swayed in the wind." My pulse quickened. "We should go back inside." Jenna nodded, but as we turned to leave, we both froze. The chair was no longer empty. A bundle of sticks, tied together with what looked like an old, frayed rope, sat in the sea. The sticks were arranged in a crude, human-like shape. It hadn't been there a minute ago. Jenna grabbed my arm. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore. Let's go." We ran back to the house, slamming the door behind us. I locked it and closed the blinds, my heart racing. Jenna was pale, her usual confidence replaced with unease. "Whoever's doing this is messed up," she said, pacing the living room. "You need to tell someone." I already told my dad, I replied. He doesn't believe me. Jenna stayed the night, and we didn't sleep much. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made us jump. Around 3 a.m., there was a soft knock at the back door. We both froze. Maybe it's her dad, Jenna whispered. No, I said, my voice shaking. He's out of town. It's just us. The knock came again, louder this time. Then silence. I mustered the courage to peek through the blinds. At first, I saw nothing, just the empty backyard bathed in moonlight. But then my eyes caught something at the edge of the woods. The chair was back. This time, it was turned toward the house, and standing behind it was a figure tall and shadowy with no discernible features. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, staring, or at least, I think it was staring. I couldn't see its face. I pulled the blinds shut and backed away. Gina grabbed my arm. What did you say? We need to call the police, I said, barely able to get the words out. We dialed 911, and the dispatcher assured us someone would be there soon. When the police arrived, the figure and the chair were gone. They searched the woods but found nothing, no footprints, no signs of anyone being there. The officers were polite but clearly skeptical, probably some teenagers trying to scare you. One of them said, we'll keep an eye on the area, but let us know if it happens again. Jenna never came back to my house after that night. I couldn't blame her. I didn't feel safe there either. A few months later, my family moved to a different town. I still think about the chair sometimes and the figure that stood behind it. Whatever it was, it wanted me to know it was there. And to this day, I wonder if it ever followed us. For a while, I thought the move would put it all behind me. Our new home was in a suburban neighborhood, miles away from any woods. It felt safe, ordinary, but even as life returned to normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. It started small. One evening, I was unpacking boxes in my new bedroom when I noticed the blind swaying slightly, though the window was closed. I chalked it up to a draft and didn't think much of it. A few days later, I found a bundle of sticks in the corner of our front yard, tied with what looked like old twine. My stomach dropped. I tried convincing myself it was just kids playing around. Maybe it had been there all along, and I hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew better. A week later, I was walking to school when I spotted something at the far end of the street. It was subtle, almost easy to miss. A chair. It was sitting on the sidewalk, tilted slightly like it had been carelessly left there. It looked old and worn, just like the ones in the woods. I froze. My first instinct was to run, but I forced myself to keep walking, refusing to look at it again. By the time I got home that afternoon, the chair was gone. That night, I dreamed of the woods again. The trees stretched endlessly, dark and suffocating. In the dream, I was walking toward the chair, drawn to it as if I had no control over my body. When I reached it, the figure was there, standing behind it. I couldn't make out its face, just a shape, darker than the shadows around it. It leaned forward, and I woke up gasping for air. I told my parents about the dream, about the chair I'd seen on the sidewalk. They dismissed it as stress from the move, saying I just needed time to adjust, but I could see the worry in their eyes. A few nights later, I woke up to a soft creaking noise. It sounded like wood groaning under weight, like someone was rocking back and forth in an old chair. My heart raced as I lay there, straining to hear. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was coming from outside my window. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. My backyard was empty at first, but then I saw it. In the corner of the yard, just beyond the glow of the porch light, was the chair. It faced the house, and behind it stood the figure. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound, but somehow I felt it watching me. I stumbled back from the window and ran to my parents' room, barely able to get the words out. My dad grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check, but by the time he got there, the chair and the figure were gone. The next morning, there was another bundle of sticks on our front porch. We called the police again, but they found no evidence of anyone being there. No footprints, no signs of entry. The officer suggested installing cameras, which we did. For a while, the activity stopped. No chairs, no figures, no bundles of sticks. But then, last week, I checked the footage from one of the cameras after hearing a faint noise in the middle of the night. My blood ran cold. There, at the edge of the frame, was the chair, and standing behind it, almost blending into the darkness, was the figure. It stood there for hours, motionless, before finally fading back into the night. I don't know what it wants, or why it keeps following me, but I have a sinking feeling that no matter where I go, it will always find me. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.